Hey guys, welcome to the Park Score podcast. Today I have returning friend George Boreas. We got some good stuff lined up for you guys today. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the recent episode of Joe Rogan where he talks to Peter Thiel, because in that discussion, there was a little segue that popped up where Girard was mentioned, mimetic theory was mentioned, and me and George thought that it would be a good opportunity to discuss some things that didn't get explored on our previous podcast. So, George, you want to go ahead and segue?
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me, Parks. That was for all of us Girardians. That Thiel episode on Rogan was a big event. The whole episode was not about that, but there was, I think, about 10-20 minutes where they really went on. And Thiel touched on some topics that I'm passionate about and I wrote about. Not just Girard in general, but specifically they got into the origin of kings. I had an essay that gets read a lot. It's on my website, Sacrificial Origin of Kings, where I kind of explain and elaborate on Girard's anthropology. And Thiel got into that, but it was kind of jumpy. I wish they'd really dug into it, but I think they had some basic disagreement, and Thiel wasn't gonna, argue the point. So Thiel kind of dropped some Girardian hints and ideas without maybe elaborating them due to time constraints, and then Joe Rogan did his own thing. So I think
he did his Joe Rogan
to talk about that. Yeah, he's got the, like you said, stoned ape theory, and Joe Rogan is he loves to go back to that topic, right? Pyramids and so on. So, what would be your summary, right? You were telling me the discussion started with the pyramids. What would you say is Joe Rogan sphere? Like Joe Rogan philosophy of how and why the pyramids were built and how the culture started, and maybe you can start from that.
Well, it's aliens, George. Don't you know? It's aliens. That's the whole reason that the pyramids got built. And if only we will all just do psychedelics and DMT, then we'll see that aliens are behind it all. No, okay, but I'm being facetious here. I love Joe Rogan. I think he's a great guy. But you do kind of see him getting sort of caught into this this routine that a lot of people get into once they are into psychedelics, which is that everything connects back to psychedelics. Everything is this sort of conspiracy, and I think Thiel. So essentially, the conversation went like this. I can't remember how or why they got onto the topic of pyramids. But Joe Rogan starts asking Thiel what he thinks the origin of the pyramids were, and Thiel says something to the effect of, "I'm not so much interested in the technology that built the pyramids. I'm more so interested in the motivation that built the pyramids. Because if you can figure out the motivation, then everything else, you can work everything else back from there." And so then he sort of, from here, he goes into this conversation about as you said, the sacrificial origin of kings, and the tomb as the first sort of cultural symbol. The how a victim at the bottom of a pile of stones, like post stoning, is that's a sort of a rudimentary version of a pyramid. And but Joe Rogan kind of he more so thought that the pyramids were some sort of ancient form of like a generator or like some sort of he kind of had a bunch of different
gamma ray kind of thing. Yeah.
Right. And so then from there the topic kind of gets dropped, like you said, but I think had Thiel had more time to sort of explain what he meant, or maybe if Joe would have been a bit more receptive, I think they could have hit on something a little bit deeper. Because as we know, Thiel is a student of Girard, or at least he is an acquaintance of Girard's. And so I didn't know if you maybe had some insight on that, or if you wanted to kind of explain what
Yeah,
he means.
yeah. I want to go over the basic Girard's basic explanation of how culture started and maybe how kings how authority, how royalty, or the institution of kingship, the institution of royalty and authority, how that evolved. And I think it's not a complex complex theory because it's kind of logical. It just gives you this, whether true or not, it gives you this step by step thing that you can follow. And that is what Thiel must have had in mind. So, so what is it according to Girard? So where do we start here? Maybe we start with the we can start with the king or the tomb. Why is the tomb the first cultural monument? I mean, maybe it's not, but it had to be one of the first, right? So Girard takes an quote unquote evolutionary approach. He says it himself, evolutionary approach to human culture. Okay, so we're not necessarily talking about Darwinian evolution, but human culture. So Girard often says that it's strange how people imagine all these cultural institutions that just popped out of nowhere, right? And pyramids is a good example. You used to have no pyramids, then suddenly boom, you have pyramids. According to let's say Joe Rogan, these pyramids were these advanced scientific monuments, one way or the other, right? And I think it's a little ironic that if somebody like Joe Rogan is kind of atheistic and doesn't really believe in, the, I don't know, religious narratives, he takes a non-evolutionary approach to these theories, as in he doesn't want to think about, like, okay, you have these giant beautiful pyramids or impressive pyramids that couldn't have just popped out of nowhere. I mean, if you don't want to think about it, you might say aliens, right? That's kind of like a cop out, right? Like, we have no idea, they popped out of nowhere, somebody more advanced, intelligent must have built them. But if you want to be an anthropologist, you ask yourself the question, okay, how did you get, what motivated the pyramids? It couldn't have been like happen right away, right? There must have been some smaller pyramids or some simpler pyramids before, right? And then they just got really advanced. So something like a pile of rocks being the first pyramid. So you see this kind of like attempt to get to the pyramids using logic and human anthropology, right? So we gotta put ourselves in think about kind of early hominids, some kind of very primitive human or maybe not even human society, right? Where you have basically a species that's hyper intelligent, okay? And basically, yeah, like just think, I don't know. You can find a lot of this behavior in chimpanzees, but if you think about, let's say, early humans, imagine them having no culture. Where Girard really starts off with the human culture is with basically conflict management. Okay, so at the Girard, once you have these animals that are really intelligent, they're not gonna just be like, oh, let's do some math. Oh, let's build a house. Oh, let's have a king. It's too simplistic to think about that. Like these things are really far away. Like for us, it's not simplistic because we're so cultural and advanced and we learn about this stuff. Mm-hmm. But for these primitive humans, where are they gonna get the idea of a king? Like that word doesn't even exist. You know what I mean? They're just a bunch of they live in a group. They're completely ignorant, right? So what did they start doing first? What is the what is the first consequence of their intelligence? It's not gonna be making music and reading books. We're too, that's too advanced. That's gonna come much later, right? So according to Girard, the first really a consequence of this hyper intelligence is it's kind of double. First of all, there's like mimetic, imitative aspect of it, where when you have like some kind of an ape that's very perceptive, they're going to notice everything around them, and it's going to increase rivalry. It's going to increase imitation. We say aping is, Thiel mentions that, right? Mm-hmm. The word ape means to imitate because we as humans notice that apes are imitative. Like if one ape starts to grab a banana, the other one kind of instinctively wants to do it. Or if they just watch you dance, they'll dance too. There's this thing. And as Thiel says, humans are just more apes than apes. We're hyper imitative. So, and culture is really all about suppressing that instinct in a sense. But anyways, so if you again imagine that early village or whatever early group, you're going to have a big problem, okay? Because due to the imitation, due to the perceptiveness, the urges, the acquisitive urges, the imitative urges are going to make conflict very flammable. You know what I mean? Like there's going to be so much more occasion for conflict. Because with less intelligent animals like rams, they eat grass, they're simple. They also get into conflict over the females, but they're dumb. They're like, they get into the conflict once a year during the rutting season, and they lose, they kind of move on, and that's it, right? But if you were going to have these intelligent apes, they're going to get violent. Like they're going to learn how to throw a rock, right? Mm-hmm. So now you have like an animal that can throw a rock or use a stick, like massively amplify its violent power, but it still doesn't have the cultural means to control it, okay? So how do these animals figure out, how do you prevent total destruction? Like how do you prevent a group from just slaughtering each other? With the, again, less intelligent animals, they have those duels, they kind of let it go, and they establish a dominance hierarchy. There's an alpha male that everybody yields to, then you got those beta males, and everybody just lives in that pack. And it's very obvious to see. I remember seeing in kangaroos first time in Australia. I was taken aback by how obvious like the alpha male is. Same thing with monkeys. On the internet you see these like kangaroo things. Like have you seen those muscular kangaroos? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like they kind of look like people. They have like shoulder. Their shoulder and like biceps are very similar to human ones, and it kind of looks funny because it's like a giant. The thing about those muscular kangaroos, only the alpha male is like that. So like a pack of kangaroos, if you have like 20 of them, there's going to be females, and there's going to be males who kind of look like females. Like they don't have muscles. And there's one kangaroo that's just like literally lying there, and he's like shoulder doing nothing, and he's the king, and nobody messes with him, and he won all the duels. Monkeys do the same thing. Like the alpha monkey just like beats up and bites all the other ones, and everybody yields to him. Anyway, with humans though, you can just imagine that those duels to establish the alpha male can't be resolved. Because when you have a bunch of, again, monkeys who can like throw rocks and organize and like set up an ambush, stab you in the back, that thing's not going to work. So to Girard, that's the kind of anthropology, or even it's called ethology, this kind of like attempt to explain the step of hominization. How do you stop acting like an animal, act like a human, right? To him, that's the key. That's what you got to look at, right? How do you manage that violence? Dominance hierarchies are not going to work anymore, okay? So how do you get a bunch of males? It's usually males, right? It's always males. Females never do duels, right? So how do you get them to not kill each other, right? And the answer is really the sacrificial or victimary mechanism at a very basic early level. Again, as Thiel pointed out, I feel like I'm just like kind of filling in the blanks for Thiel. But Thiel at some point says that hunting was really important, right? So hunting was really important, must have been really important, because a lot of times people, you hear like these carnivores, they say, we're animals, we hunt. That's ironically kind of wrong, and here's why. Like, yes, lions hunt, right? Hyenas. But they are not our direct cousins, right? Who are our cousins? Biological cousins would be chimpanzees or gorillas, Do they hunt? They don't. They don't hunt, right? So if you look at chimpanzees, actually they rummage, they eat bugs and fruits, right? They do hunt, actually. And this is a very important thing for Girard, and something Rogan would have brought up. Chimpanzees hunt. He brings it up, actually. Have you heard about the is it a colobus monkeys?
It's the isn't it the other species of monkey that they will hunt, or they will sort of hunt for
Yes,
sport, sort of, or is it almost
that's
like a
it. That's
team
it.
building sort of a thing?
That's it, right? So the interesting thing about it, so these anthropologists went into Africa, and observed these things, and they were shocked by the colobus monkey hunt. First of all, they were shocked by the brutality of it. Like the chimps would be like very peaceful, and then they would absolutely savage these monkeys, like tear them alive, stuff like that, right?
Mm.
And another interesting thing was that they didn't need to hunt. So they did a study, like, do they need extra protein? Why are they doing this? There was no nutritional reason or value to hunt. It was actually nutritionally wasteful. Like, if they just wanted to eat well, they would have been better off saving their energy and eating something else. Okay? So why do they hunt? And, the hypothesis here is that it's some kind of animal sacrificial, pre-human sacrificial mechanism where aggression builds up among chimps, right? There's going to be competition. Maybe they're well fed. Now it's time for mating season. Now is a time when that violence can flare up. And chimps are also pretty intelligent. So rather than letting out that aggression on each other, they vent it on the colobus monkeys, And Girard has a very interesting point saying that violent urge is very similar to sexual urge. In a sense that he literally says, like, once it builds up, it's hard to diffuse. You need an outlet for it, right? And another thing is, he says, if you can't vent it on your first object of preference, you're gonna keep looking for something else to vent it out on. So if you can't get the hot chick, you're gonna maybe like go down, your options. But same thing with violence, right? So these animals, they want to tear somebody apart. They're frustrated, and they just gotta learn not to tear each other apart. So anyways, we can go into these details forever, but going back to humans, human hunting, like this big game violent hunting woolly mammoth, again, it doesn't seem to me that that's something that made nutritional sense necessarily, right? But what that provided to early humans is that edification, right? Mm-hmm. This intelligent animal that's violent finds a target, scary, violent. So basically kind of like lets you, the violence of it and the size of the animal just provides that fascination where it kind of challenges you enough, and it lets out your aggression. But also, very importantly, hunt employs your intelligence in a sort of constructive ways. You start using your intelligence to communicate with your friends, right? You start using your intelligence to build technology, to build a better weapon, better spear. If you're tracking these animals, you start learning geography, right? You get that spatial intelligence, and so on and so forth. So this hunt, in a sort of biological sense, right, was this what would be called a motor of hominization in a biological sense. Okay, we can get into the religious and the Bible like later, but yeah. So that sacrificial mechanism of basically channeling your violence out was really central there. Okay, so what does that, just to make one more point, what does that have to do with the pyramids, right? Or kings? But let's do the pyramids. So hunting is all nice, fine and dandy, but eventually maybe you get bored of it, or maybe eventually humans just become too human, and just killing an animal is not going to provide that epiphany, that release, It's going to become too commonplace. So even during coexistent with the hunting phase, humans had this thing where the violence would actually accumulate onto a culprit, okay, within the community, another human, right? Mm-hmm. So like you want to displace your aggression, like colobus monkey would be a displacement from a colobus monkey to somebody else. Girard calls this the first symbol. First metaphor. So Girard, this kind of gets into it, but Girard's saying something like, what's the first symbol? This was a very common question for these anthropologists, right? Girard's answer is the first symbol was murder substitution, right? So rather than killing your rival, you kill somebody else in their place. And that was like the first time animals kind of like had this thing where like something else stands for something else, and developmental language and so on. But anyways, quickly to do the pyramid or the tomb, the sacrificial, why do they call it sacrificial act? Why is victimary and sacrificial connected? Why is hunting woolly mammoth sacred, or why is killing a human being sacred? Right? What's the connection? Well, the connection is that once you get that channeling, once you kill that victim, you get that release. Girard calls it the first religious epiphany, where you were tormented, obsessed. I mean, if you're a monkey, you're not going to be like very, very tormented, right? But imagine like a full human. Your rivalries drive you nuts, right? You're going to be obsessive. You're going to be full of hate. The world around you is falling apart. And then when you find that culprit, human culprit, or maybe animal early on, but when you find that culprit, that demon who was tormenting you and causing the black magicking community, and you stone them. A lot of times it was stones, so people just grab stones. You kill them. It would basically, for lack of a better word, that would be experienced as a miracle, okay? Because it would be one event that solved all the problems, that got all the anger and frustration out, that got all the evil spirits out, and that suddenly let everybody live in peace. And in pre-moral societies, they weren't bothered by the fact that the same event was both the cause of evil and the cause of good, right? So like these archaic religions, the gods are both the most horrible thing, like demons, but they're also the most beneficial thing, right? And that's just how it was. You can look at any religion, it was like that. Because God was the same thing that or a god, right, or a spirit, was the same thing that caused all that unrest in the community, but also that thing that motivated the lynching or the murder. And suddenly, there's that epiphany of peace. And then people would just kind of look at that pile of stones where they killed that demon, and they'll be like, wow, I really remember that. So there'd be a cultural remembrance of what happened, and there'd be a story built around it, and that's how you have that first cultural monument. What's a monument? Monument is something that stands in the middle of the city and makes you remember, right, what happened in the past. So that's my very long-winded Girardian anthropology.
And so what Thiel in the episode made sure to make a point of is this idea that because for a person who is not versed in mimetic theory, a person who is hearing all of this for the first time, it might be difficult to connect the dots between a king and sacrificial victim. So the idea is that a king is necessarily someone who is subsuming the like guilt and social malaise and just responsibility for everything that's sort of going on. And Girard makes this point, and Thiel reiterates this point in the podcast. The king is essentially a sacrificial victim who has found a way to postpone or has taken advantage of the postponement of their ritual killing, and has, through that postponement, found a way to sort of get some power out of it, and sort of ride that out in the meantime. That way, when they finally do die, so this might be slightly off topic, but it's just something that I'm having a hard time connecting. So how do you think it is that people? Because I don't think people make the conscious connection like the ancient Egyptians. Like, I don't think they made the conscious connection that, okay, we have sacrificial victims here, and when we stone them to death and they're covered in a pile of stones, it looks like a pyramid. Therefore, our king, because he is a sort of sacrificial victim, we are going to entomb him in this pyramid. Like, I don't think that it happens on a conscious level like that. No. And part of me just wonders what might be going on when that symbol of the pyramid is, I guess, being chosen. Like, whose idea it is to do this, and why does it make sense to make it a pyramid? Why not something else? Because it sort of betrays this unconscious sort of connection that the king has to like a common sacrificial victim.
Yeah, yeah.
Go for it.
I have this essay, Origin of Kings. Okay, so you're definitely right. Like this wasn't definitely a community wouldn't be conscious that, first of all, that their victim is even like an arbitrary victim, like the scapegoat. When we say scapegoat today, we mean somebody unjustly prosecuted. If you believe that about your victim, that whole system's not going to work, right? So okay, so I'm kind of looking at my essay here. I try to really do it step by step. So you have to. We kind of like we're kind of on the right track to get to the king. Okay.
Okay.
There's another step. So like a little bit later, fast forward a little bit, and the universal religion is sacrificial, sacrifice, violent sacrifice. Every culture. That's like if you ask yourself, question, what is common to all of humanity? Polynesian islands, Europeans, everywhere, right? Every culture, no matter how different, they all had obviously religion, but they all had bloody sacrifice, violent sacrifice. Every single culture had this thing where, like, if there's a crisis, or even if there's not a crisis, we need to kill somebody, and their blood is sacred. You know what I mean? So that's the big question. The original. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say...
I have a lot to say, so I want to break it up, so please.
Of course. So going through your essay here, there's something in particular that, for me, kind of summed it up very well, which is that it says, it would make sense that a society would groom a designated sacrificial victim to have on the ready in case of a crisis. So essentially that's it. That is the role of a king.
That's the king. That's the king, yes. So... early on, there was no ritual or planning, right? If shit hits the fan, you know what I mean? The archaic mind would be like, there's a demon, right, among us, right? And then medically, they would kind of figure it out, and you can tell the narrative different ways. You can say like, gods are angry,
right?
Gods are angry. They want blood. They want our blood. They want to kill us. So let's give them a blood of one person. Could be like that, right? Rather like. The gods are thirsty for blood. Okay, we need to give them some. So instead of them drinking all our blood, let's be pious, kill some sacred victim, and that's gonna make the god happy and leave us alone. Or there's many varieties you can go through, right? Different cultures have different ones, but yeah, in a moment of crisis, the kind of human instinct was somebody needs to die. Okay, and the way these seasonal rituals and religious rituals developed was, as you just read, let's have a victim at the ready. Okay, now here's where it gets interesting and a little bit unexpected, but that's been proven by studying these cultures. For your victim to be effective, okay, the person has to be both an insider and an outsider. Okay, this is very important. If you just kill somebody out there, out of your village, it's not going to work. Because remember, the demon is in your village, right? So what does it matter if you kill somebody else? The problem is inside. One of us has to die, right? But the person, the victim also has to be an outsider in the sense that they don't have a lot of friends, right? Because if you try to kill somebody with a lot of friends, their friends are going to come back at you. Right. So what happens is, like, the scapegoat, the victim, human victim, ends up having these kind of specifications. They need these check marks that they need to check off. Right? You can't kill an influential person. They got weapons and buddies, right? That's why a lot of times victims were lame, right? Somebody who's like kind of lame or looks monstrous or something like that. But anyway, let me see here. So with a lot of these rituals, what they would have, the designated victim would be somebody you have in Greece, ancient Greece, very famous example would be the Pharmacus. Even classical Greek cities like Athens, Thebes, I don't know, they would have these like vagabonds, these like kind of homeless people or just outsiders that are kind of maybe, I don't know, somehow maybe they're crippled or something. And
right.
The city would feed them. The city would feed them on public purse. Then if they have a crisis, this person would be ritually killed. Maybe in later times they would be expelled. You know what I mean? But interesting, a more kind of pertinent one example would be the Tupinamba people. I think they're still a minority in Brazil. They had a very interesting ritual where they were cannibals, okay? As a lot of tribes were. They would like devour their enemies. And Girard writes how like if they just kill them on the battlefield, they would just like devour them there. But they had this thing where like if they catch a captive, okay, they catch this outsider, a war prisoner, they would bring them into their village, and this person is going to be sacrificed. That cannibalistic sacrifice, again, it had nothing to do with nutrition. Okay, it was a ritual. It was a basically human sacrifice ritual that involved eating also, right? But that's the way it needs to be understood. Anyway, so you get this war prisoner, and he's going to be your human sacrifice eventually. But the problem you have is he's an outsider, right? So remember, the requirement has to be an insider. So what they did have to do first, you can't just sacrifice him right away. You got to make him one of your own. So this prisoner would be actually treated like a king. He wouldn't have to work. They would give him food. They would treat him with honor. They would literally, again, they had no idea of king. Maybe they have chieftains, so it wasn't official this person was a king. But they would treat him really well because in a lot of ways he was a sacred person, right? He was going to provide that religious epiphany by being sacrificed to gods, right? So, but anyways, for maybe 1-2 years, he was given sexual favor. Like people would give their wives or women would be like, here, have some, help yourself, you know. And so this person would be just treated like a total king for 1 year, 2 years, and then when the date comes, he would suddenly be tied. They would start insulting him, slapping him, spitting on him, and eventually they'll kill him and eat him. You find this place all over the world. If you look at the enthronement rituals in Africa of kings, right? It was usually involved something like he had to eat forbidden food, he had to commit incest. He basically, to become a king, he had to commit all these crimes. But then he would become a king. You see?
Right.
So he had to be the good guy. He had to kind of be the bad guy, but also the good guy. They had the same thing over in Japan and in Siberia, probably in China. I have this theory that pandas were human sacrifice. You know how they say pandas are like they're incompetent. They wouldn't survive in the wild. My theory is that because if you look at Asia, actually all over Asia, they use bears as sacrifices. In Japan, in Hokkaido, the Ainu people, they had the same thing as the Tupinamba, just with the bear. They would get a bear cub from the forest. Then they would raise this bear cub for 2 years, treat it like a human, absolutely spoil it. 2 years later, everybody gets in the middle of the village. They brutally kill it. They drink its blood. Everybody eats its meat. And the cub is sacred. It's a god, you know? So, again, as I said, it's not something you would maybe dream up lying in your bed, you know what I mean? But once you look at evidence of our ancestors, and that includes Europeans, you see this. It's everywhere, right? The ambivalence, the outsider, who's both like evil and good, who gets treated both good and bad. Okay? So then you ask yourself a question. Okay, imagine this Tupinamba, let's go with the Tupinamba example, right? You get captured. It could be like a comedy movie, right? I think they have a comedy movie where like 2 British guys get kidnapped in India. I forget what it's called. It was actually Sean Connery starred in it. But anyways, imagine you're Tupinamba captive. They capture you, tie you up, and you kind of know what's going to happen. You figure it out. They're actually treating you with respect. You're you're a sacred person. You're going to be sent to God in order to rescue the community. They might treat you well, even thinking like, maybe if I treat this person really well, maybe the gods will bless me, right? But you have to die, because that's just the historical memory. You have to die. But what if you do a little trick on these people and you're like, you know, I am a holy person, and God is already talking to me, and I got a message, right, from you, from your God, right? And then you start telling them, look, do this, don't do that. Because, a lot of times these things, when you kill somebody, like there was a kind of lesson, there's a moral lesson to it, right? Why did the crisis happen? Somebody did something bad, right? Somebody committed adultery, right? There was a crisis, the person was killed, and what did God say at the end of the story? What was the moral of the story? Don't commit adultery, okay? Because this thing's going to happen again. So basically, that's how you got your moral code. Through like these many, many crises, people kind of learn. God's don't want you to do this. This is going to cause problems. This is going to cause problems. This is going to cause problems, right? How do you prevent crises? How do you prevent the wrath of God? You come up with a more ethical system, legal code, something like that, right? So this person who was going to be killed might have been like, look, I'm talking to God. God's talking to me. I'll tell you what to do in order to be blessed. Okay, listen to me, and you're not gonna have problems. Trust me, God, I'm talking to God. So and then people start listening to this person, obeying him, and everything's working fine and dandy. And then eventually the guy's just like, why do you even need to kill me? Right? Let's kill a pig instead. Let's kill a cow instead. I'll just hang around. I'll be the sacred guy. I'll be a sacred victim. But let's just not kill me. You know what I mean? Like, what's the point? And what do you have at that point? Right. You have your king. You see? So it's not that mystical. This kind of happen organically, right? Over many, many generations. Right. So by the time you get to Egypt, that thing's already happened. By the time you have civilization, all of this stuff's already forgotten. It's something that we have to do as anthropologists, archaeologists. You have to dig up the facts, and using our Christian awareness of violence and just our modernity, we can see it, right? But were the Egyptians like conscious, or anybody else conscious of like what they were doing the way we are? Absolutely not. Because if you were, you wouldn't do it. Like if you're thinking like, oh, we just need to kill somebody. Like, no, these people really believed God want blood. They really believe that. That's why they did it, right? They're ignorant. So yeah, that's how you get kinship. That's get authority. So this person starts organizing the village. He's gonna start leading them in war. He's gonna start leading the civil works, right? Building the fence. He's gonna start arbitrating arguments, right? If two villagers having beef, they come in. This guy figures out God thinks you're right, you're wrong, right? So what are these the most basic kind of offices of a king are judge, right? Settle disputes, lead the country in war, and maybe do some civil works, right? So there you have it. This isn't some kind of inspiration. It's very scientific. Does it feel very scientific? Kind of like ABC, just takes you from A to B, how you get kings. So yeah, by the time you get into ancient Egypt, you have so early kings wouldn't have high authority, right? I mean, you're talking about very primitive. Another great example that I have at the beginning of my essay is the bogmen in Ireland. It was really, again, it's kind of funny, but also gnarly, where they find these bugmen. They're cut. They're like that, a happy face, but their throat was slit. But another interesting thing they found is their nipples were sliced off. I was like, what? So it turns out, somebody wrote, I would have to double check that, but it turns out in ancient Celtic culture, one of the ways you show obeisance to your king is you suck on their nipples. I don't know if that was ritual or something you do like when you say hi, but you suck on the king's nipples as a kind of sign of respect. So the fact that these people, like these sacrifices, that had their nipples cut off leads you to think that they were kind of decommissioned as kings. You know what I mean? So you can imagine a situation where you have this delayed human sacrifice, right? This guy's kind of there. He's being well fed. He's a sacred person. He's kind of telling people what to do. But then suddenly there's a drought. Suddenly there's a drought. There's not enough food. So these villagers are like, what? What's going on? Like, why are gods hating on us? I thought we're cool. I thought this guy was kind of hooked up with the gods. Obviously not. Obviously gods are angry. They're not giving us food. So this king, he's messed up. Okay? He messed up. We got to sacrifice him. Okay? It was cool. He was a king. Things are fine. But now that gods are not happy, we clearly have to actually proceed with the sacrifice. We're not delaying it anymore. right? So you can imagine this intermediate period where, like, at first there's just sacrificial victims, and then there was like, mostly sacrificial victim, little bit king. Then it's like half king, half sacrificial victim. And then once you get to actual civilization, because we're talking about prehistory here, right? No written record. Once you get to civilization, kings have won. Okay, the thing was resolved in king's favor. Now kings are not only not sacrificed, but they're absolutely powerful. They have armies. You don't mess with them, right? But they still definitely retain that sacred element. Like, they are still the ones. They're still your pontifex. They're still the link between the community and the gods. And they're responsible for the community, right? If the blessing, if the community is blessed, you honor the king. If the community is not blessed, the king needs to be sacrificed, right? So a king, like a pharaoh, Egyptian pharaoh, it wasn't individualistic. Like, if you think of a pharaoh as somebody who's just kind of like, some kind of like, I don't know, capitalist, like profit driven. Like, no, that was so far away from everybody's mind. I mean, you're talking about very basic society where people are just trying to get food and not die from a plague, right? So the king understood, the pharaoh would have understood himself as such, right? He is kind of divine, and they're doing all these rituals and sacrifices to make sure gods are happy, because that's, pre moral code or pre legal code. That's how they thought. Like, if things are bad, gods are angry. If things are good, gods are happy. If gods are angry, you need to sacrifice. Okay, so that's why they had temples where they're constantly sacrificing cows and animals, and they always sacrificed because they were terrified. In those times, people, like, you're living in a violent era. You don't have Google Maps. You don't know who your neighbors are on the other side of the hill. Watch Apocalypto. That was a good movie. I had a podcast on that, right? Like, you live in a jungle. Maybe, like, next morning, some, like, savage warrior is going to come and slaughter your whole family. Okay? So you live in you're terrified of foreigners. You're always afraid gods are going to strike you down. And you're constantly doing sacrifices and doing this religion and trying to figure out, what do we need to do in order not to cause this collapse? Okay? So this creates this push that causes the development of religion and morality and later legal code and later the whole culture. Like, it's all about kind of managing that archaic violence.
And once again, we see with all of this that Christianity is essentially the religion of mimetic awareness. I mean, Romans 13 says, "Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God." So it's sort of the same idea that the powers that be are essentially instituted by God, but the difference is that in the pre-Christian sort of mimetic crises, the idea is just, oh, well, this king didn't work out, therefore we need to sacrifice him. The next one will be better. The next one will be even more divine, even better. But
or the king's blood. Yeah, sorry, but king's blood. Right. You didn't even think it like the king's blood would satisfy king. But anyway, yes, go on. The Christian thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, you had mentioned earlier something about how during these rituals, they would, in different parts of the world, they would have them commit incest. They would do all of these sorts of things to essentially, like, how did you put it exactly? They would have them commit incest for what end exactly?
So we didn't clarify on that, so we're talking about African rituals of enthronement, okay, and okay, so what's going on? So why does the king have to do bad stuff? The idea is the pharmacus, like the Greek word. It's pharmacus is the root word of pharmacy, right? The cure and the poison. Okay, so you need that person. There's this very strong idea that holy person is both good and bad, right? In order early on, and like in the earliest times, when the person was sacrificed, again, it's hard to think about it, but they did believe that this person was also like filled with negative sacred, like evil spirits.
Right.
Because the
Right.
archaics did not distinguish. This is a new thing where you have angels and demons. Okay, the archaics, there was no angels and demons. They're the same thing, just spirits, right? And these spirits do bad things and do good things, right? So in order to create that pharmacus, that a sacred person, that person needed to take on those elements. He needed to be a bad guy.
Hmm.
We like bad guys, right? We like bad guys. So same thing.
Right.
So if you want to be king, you needed to be basically ritualistically ejected, expelled from the community, right? So actually, those things, when you look at African rituals, actually they're replacement for the murder. Rather than killing the victim, you ritually expel them. You're dirty. Like they would have to sit outside a village. They would break all the village's rules. They would become that bad guy, and now they're expelled. But then, in a like a kind of like a weird reversal, they come back. They get out of their hut, and suddenly they're actually dead. But after they've died, they come back out. After they've died as a regular person, they come out as a king. Okay, and Girard says because there was a lot of incest. This was an interesting point for me with Cleopatra and stuff. You know, incest was always a thing with royal families, even early on in Europe. And in the modern times, it was about preserving privilege, right? Preserving the privilege, like you know, you only marry other kings to keep your bloodline. But Girard suggests that in these archaic times, like in Egypt, incest was also a big thing, but it might not have been about dynastic rivalry. There was no dynastic rivalry. There was only one king. You don't need to. So he says that maybe why incest was a royal thing from the beginning is because of this need to break the rules. You needed to do something outrageous. You needed to like eject yourself out of normal morality in order to have that status as a sacred person of the community.
This reminds me. This reminds me of the whole modern notion we have now of this idea that if someone is going to get promoted by the deep state, if somebody's going to get to the point where they could run for president or something like that, you have to fail upward. They have to catch you with your hand in the cookie jar, or they have to compromise you with some weird sexual crime in order for them to be like, okay, this is our guy now. We can put him up there because as soon as he starts getting online or something starts, not going how we want it to, we can essentially pull the plug on him, and we got enough dirt on him that we can sort of do that. And once again, you have essentially someone who's going up as a representative and a sacrificial lamb, who is sort of being, in some sense, set up to fail. But it's only that failing upward that even allows them to get to that point. And then earlier you had mentioned how a crucial component of being an effective scapegoat is that you have to be an insider outsider. You have to be close enough to the community where blaming the crisis on you is believable, but not so integral to the community that you provide even more like disorder upon your scapegoating. And it's funny that you use the term insider outsider because going back to Peter Thiel, so he has his book 0 to 1 where he talks about essentially building non-mimetic startups. It's a whole book about startups. I don't know if you've read 0 to 1.
Yeah, I have it. I have it on my shelf. I read it a while ago. Yeah.
It's funny because in that book, I had read this long before my awareness of mimetic theory, but he actually talks about being an insider outsider and how this is essentially something that gives one an edge in creating a startup company. And I don't know, it might be a tenuous connection, but it's funny that the same sort of verbiage is being used. We're talking about Peter Thiel here, and the perfect scapegoat is an insider outsider, and also Peter Thiel sort of, in a way, it's almost like this is sort of my understanding of mimetic theory, is that essentially, we have Christ who was scapegoated, and he was the perfect example of what a person could be, totally sinless. And You know, essentially, Scripture calls us to be like Christ, and so in it's interesting that Thiel, who is a sort of Girardian thinker, is essentially saying you need to be an insider outsider. You need to essentially put yourself in a position where you do indeed risk being scapegoated if you're going to go and create this, great company, or if you're going to go and, you know, um, be what you could be, or I don't know what the right way to phrase it would be, but no, I thought it was interesting because that was the last time I heard the term insider outsider used, and it was
Yeah.
Peter Thiel. Um, but getting back to the Thiel and Rogan podcast, so obviously Rogan, he kind of he's not all about mimetic theory and all that. He's kind of a little bit skeptical of it, and he puts forth that no, actually, I think it's probably aliens. It's the pyramids. They probably have something to do with psychedelics in some kind of a way. That was probably how consciousness developed. And I know we're at the 51-minute mark right here, but
I can
you
go on.
write. Okay, cool. You write
Yeah.
in Modern Malaise about the prevalence of the modern mind to concoct conspiracy theories, the seduction of conspiracy theories to the modern mind. And as someone who previously had gone down just such a rabbit hole with psychedelics and Terence McKenna, stoned ape theory, all these buzzwords, I can totally see where Rogan's coming from, because when you're in that rabbit hole, it actually does seem like all of these things connect. Like it has to be, there has to be some sort of psychedelic, hidden knowledge that is blah 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 blah. And so
Yeah.
I just wonder what your take on that is, because you talk about conspiracy theories in Modern Malaise, and so I wonder what your take is.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I mean, I've been high before. Like, you have those epiphany. I get it. I mean, not that much, but like, I wouldn't deny it. I mean, obviously, Girard has a different storyline, right?
Right.
These things are not necessarily contradictory. I wouldn't deny that some psychedelic somewhere in some Incan village or something led to an epiphany or a big realization, right? But it was psychedelics the root, like, because the big challenge here, the big rivalry here is what's that motor, the motor of hominization, right? What's that one spark, that one engine that accelerated, made a leap from ape to human, at least biologically. Okay, so because there was a leap. Okay, this thing, well, leap in like long-term sense, but something that. So if you're telling me like, okay, some monkeys or apes just got high and became humans, that doesn't make sense to me. I'm not denying that you can have amazing visions if you get high, maybe demonic visions or not, but if Joe Rogan can sit down and do ayahuasca in LA because he lives in a super advanced society and he's got money, right? If you are a hunter living in a jungle and you do too much drugs, you're not going to be able to build a culture, right? The
Right.
problem that Girard is talking about is really like Girard's thesis. Like, wait, like the main thing we had to do is we had to control violence. Okay, we have to control violence. Things are going to get really. We need culture to realize how we're not going to be violent. Okay, so and a lot of moderns don't want to admit that. A lot of humanists don't want to admit that because a lot of people want to hold on to this idea, which is a nice idea. They want to hold on to the idea that humans are essentially good. They're not
Right.
comfortable with the idea that like our culture rose out of violence and depravity. They're not
Right.
comfortable with that, even
Right.
though the even though you see it everywhere, like human sacrifice was everywhere, it was gnarly, right? So yeah, so Joe Rogan is like somebody got high and then they invented the Pythagorean theorem.
Mm.
That's kind of like one of those cop outs where it's like, it doesn't really explain anything, right?
Right.
It's like basically saying the pyramids were built by aliens. maybe, I don't think they were, but maybe, but you're not explaining it. You're not taking the hood and telling us logically how it happened, right? So,
Right.
so that's my thing. But I was going to talk about when it comes, I think hallucinogenic drugs, I think, were an important part of human culture, early human culture. And their use was in ritual. Okay, that's where Girard would, like on Girard's map, that's where he would put hallucinogenics. Okay, it had to do with that sacrificial crisis. How? So Girard has this blueprint of the universal ritual. Every ritual is the same, and later as they evolved, they like dropped different aspects and became totally different. But every ritual has like what, 4 or 5 stages. Okay, first stage is crisis or indifferentiation, so chaos. Second stage is increase in rivalry. Okay, where you're like kind of conflicting and arguing with each other. Third stage is when that arguing gets so heated that people kind of start losing it and might start going crazy and hallucinating. Okay. And the fourth stage is where all this crazy anger and hallucination mimetically precipitates onto a single victim. Like one narrative wins. Somebody starts saying this hunchback is a devil, right? And nobody else knows how to solve their problem, so they're like, that must be it. You must be right? So you get to this point where like you agree. Suddenly everybody agrees. Somebody really says like, yeah, man, aliens did build the pyramid, and that's a very settling, satisfying thing that you figured it out and all your buddies agree with you, right? And then you go through that sacrificial act where you kill the hunchback. You figured it out. God's great. And then after the fifth one is the feast. Okay? So you see that in rituals, right? So the first part would be like a lot of acting, all this theater, music, dance, sports. All of that came out of ritual. Okay? So the first dances were an imitation of that rivalry. Like you'd be dancing, facing each other. Like I hate you, you hate me. We're rivals. We're fighting. It would be like a simulation of a conflict, right? Sport, same thing. Right, there was a way to like, fight each other, box each other, and they start killing each other. You fight each other, and then the feast, right? Like just having a barbecue. That's really a remnant of eating that victim, right? I mean, I don't want to sound cartoonish, but it really is what it is. After a really long time, that's what it is. So a lot of these cultures, when they needed to induce this ritual, okay? So like you can't just have a ritual on Tuesday, that's not gonna create an epiphany, right? You actually need a serious experience. You need to create. It's like you need directing skills, choreography. Some priest, somebody in there needs to really make this thing, kicks off, right? How do you induce rivalry? How do you induce that ideation of monsters? Well, ayahuasca, right? Because you need that ritual. At the height of that ritual, you need people to see the monster. You need people to be edified by God. And when it's all over, people need to come out and say, man, that was crazy, This is so cultures did have hallucinogens, and they used them ritually. Nobody did hallucinogens on a Tuesday. You know what I mean? That would be, first of all, like blasphemous. That would be like eating your sacrament with your cereal. Extremely like offensive. You do not do that. So whatever these cultures did, the ayahuasca or whatever hallucinogens, mushrooms, it was always done strictly within the ritual. Okay. So and you can see the evidence for that. And that's where the moderns don't get it. This goes back to Dionysiac mania, where these like Nietzscheans think that Greeks were always like manic. They were just always imitating Dionysus. To an ancient Greek, that would have been retarded. So like, right. It'd be crazy. Yes, there was Dionysiac mania. You do it at a certain calendar day and a certain, feast, precisely because you need to let it out then. You need to control that scary spirits and unleash it, and then on Monday you go back to your work. Okay, but the moderns, they're saying that you should be Dionysiac all the time, which just means you're going crazy all the time, and they also want to get high all the time, which is not what this thing was used for. So, yes, hallucinogens might have something to do with this religion in some realization. Not probably in the Bible, though, because Girard commented on this. He notes how, for example, in the temple, right, in the Hebrew temple, one rule was that you cannot drink wine in the temple.
Right.
Like, everybody got to be sober.
Right.
Okay, so again, here you see this thing where the Hebrews, the Jews, are doing the opposite of what everybody's doing, right?
Right.
Like a lot of cultures, you got this Greek Scythians. Scythians smoke weed. You know, they got high in marijuana. But but the Jews are like, no, our God is not like that. We don't want to see monsters. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, and I could go on about Christianity because you mentioned it. So, again, we can't explain all of Christianity, right? But to connect it to this thing, one very interesting thing that I see nowadays, people saying like all ancient gods were demons. You heard that, right? Or like even now, Hindu gods are demons, whatever, like insensitive. But you get these hardcore Christians saying all the other gods. Like if it's not a Christian god, it's the demon.
Right.
And you kind of have to think about it because you look at these gods in Mesoamerica, near you, right? The Aztecs, they were essentially very demonic. I mean, they wanted human blood and so on.
They wanted.
So yeah. So the question is like, did these people worship the devil, the Aztecs? Well, yes and no. I think that's really important to understand. They did worship the devil, but not in the sense that we worship Jesus. Like they didn't think, oh, this God's wonderful. Give him some human blood. No, like what these people thought, they thought that their gods are fucked up. Okay? These gods created the world. They're violent. They're scary. You need to bribe them with human blood. Because if you don't bribe them with human blood, they're going to come and kill everybody's children.
Right.
So yes, they did submit sacrifice to demonic gods, but it's not because they liked demonic stuff. It's because they were terrified. And they just felt like, yes, this is what God's like. God wants sacrifice. They're not moralistic about it. That came later. That's us being spoiled. We're talking about pre-morality. They just observe what happens. If you don't have rituals, everybody kills everybody. Right? So yes, the gods were demonic in the sense that they require sacrifice, but these people didn't have that like loving relationship. They're basically bribing. I mean, you see that even today in Europe. I mean, I'm in the Balkans. You see like you can see this in like European books where like this like folk superstitions, like you do some bribe, you bribe the devil to leave you alone kind of thing. That's what archaic religion is. So yes, so Christianity and the biblical religion comes in and says, this is not the true God. These are demons. We don't want to bribe these people. And it accumulates in Jesus, who comes in and says, God does not want human blood. You don't need to sacrifice. But humans are so used to. So he becomes the sacrifice to end all sacrifices. I'm going to be sacrificed. My sacrifice on the cross is open people's eyes and say, wow, that is horrible and unnecessary. We don't need to kill each other to make a God happy. God does not want this. So Girard wrote about this so much, right? So Christianity, one thing that Christianity is, it's this debunking of old religion. That whole thing with having to sacrifice to make gods happy just gets flushed out. And another thing I would say, because people talk about early Christians, right? These early Christians that were hearing the story about Jesus for the first time in the Roman Empire, they weren't philosophers, right? They weren't scientists. That stuff didn't exist. They were illiterate. But what they were really into was their sacrificial religions. So I think that these early Christians understood this Girardian thing much better than the moderns do, because thanks to Christianity, we've moved so far away from that we don't understand what it looked like. Right?
We take it for granted.
You had these, but you had these people that were, you take them for granted. Even Romans, again at the podcast, gladiatorial games, they were not sport. They're not just like basketball, but high tea basketball. No, they're sacrificial rituals. Okay, first gladiatorial games were done on the tombs of chieftains. So gladiatorial games were like a sacrificial ritual where, again, it got modified by the Etruscans, but those gladiators dying, they were just being a human sacrifice. This is not controversial. Like that's even Romans knew that. Like Romans would even late in the Republic, Romans would go into the Colosseum, pick the bloody sand from the gladiator, and pour it on the tomb of like their relatives, because they thought the sacred blood, satisfies the gods. So anyways, these early Christians, they understood archaic religion because that was their day-to-day religion. So when you started telling them that Jesus is sacrifice unto God, but that God is not violent and that this ends all sacrifices, to them that was very much relevant. You were talking about their day-to-day. To us, it sounds bookish when you talk about the sacrifices, but to them it wasn't. These people would go every day and cut a rooster's throat in their local temple and spray the blood on the altar and then eat it and make a fire to the priest. This is done all the time. Okay, this is what Christianity wiped out. Then philosophy came. Then all these Greek philosophers came and started challenging it philosophically. But that archaic, like religious thing, kind of got forgotten, in my opinion, in the modern times. And thanks to modern anthropology and thanks to people studying these indigenous tribes, that thing came back. And I think Girard really cracked the code. Because these early guys who are studying these tribes, they didn't know what to make of it. They're confused. They didn't want to think that religion is essential. They didn't want to take it seriously. They just kind of gave up on it.
Right. Something that Rogan kind of puts forth in the podcast is he has this idea that first there was politics, and then religion arose as a tool of politics to control the masses. But Thiel kind of pushes back on this and is like, no, are we not so sure that religion was there first, and then politics, in some sense, sort of is this thing that sort of calcifies around the religious experience or around the religious institutions.
Absolutely, yeah.
So this kind of has taken us off topic, but it's a burning question that I've had for a little while now. So you are Orthodox as far as I know, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And Girard was Catholic, and I know for a fact that his Catholicism, it seemed to deeply influence his work. And I just wonder, in your opinion, what do you think? Where do you think? Because as far as I know, the Catholics and the Orthodox have a different theology with regard to Christ's crucifixion and what exactly that meant for mankind. It might be subtle. These are things that I'm kind of wading into for the first time. I'm trying to study and kind of learn more on. So I'm kind of wanting to pick your brain on it a bit. How do you think that Girard's Catholicism influenced his understanding of mimetic theory? And do you think that the Orthodox understanding of mimetic theory or the Orthodox perspective sort of adds anything to mimetic theory that wasn't there previously? Just total just throwaway question, but it's been kind of
No. I think we talked offline a bit about this once. Okay, so first of all, for Girard's biography, okay, he started off kind of atheistic. Like he came up in the 50s, 60s, French intellectual. Atheism was in fashion. I mean, I don't know, as an American, you might not appreciate that. I'm from Yugoslavia, right? Kind of also Europe, but Christianity just really wasn't very strong, especially not in the academia. And yes, Girard comes from a Catholic French family, but this guy did not grow up religious. He ended up not really thinking or caring about religion. His first great books, Desire, the Seed Desire in the novel. I mean, he's got let's say a fondness for Christian heritage, but his Catholicism is not influencing anything because he doesn't have a Catholicism. Okay, right. He's just reading books, and then same thing, Violence and the Sacred. I mean, a lot of atheists like these books. You can totally read that book as an atheist and just be because it just talks about the natural history. it wasn't that Girard's Catholicism influenced his work. It was the other way around, actually. Okay, he kept doing this work, and as he kept doing this research, he's like, man, like now I get why Christianity is true, and he says it. So his work led him to Catholicism, and then maybe later it influenced it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
As I said, so when you start talking about Orthodoxy, Catholicism versus Protestantism, you find the differences and you debate those differences, right? Girard's Christian topics are so broad and fundamental that they don't really get into those differences. I think that
Okay.
all Christian dominations would basically, whatever Girard says about Christianity, that's kind of like what's common about
Right.
Christianity. So he's not like he's not a church father discussing the Trinity. I mean, he never does
Right.
anything like that. There is one thing though, which is the theories of atonement. Okay, and as I told you, I found his Girard's theory of atonement is, I don't know even if you call it that because it's anthropology. But you can take his anthropology, which we just talked about, how Jesus like canceled the human sacrifice. You can take his anthropology and try to match it up, kind of line it up to one of these competing theories of atonement. And I didn't even know about this, but actually I don't know the names. But I think one is called ransom theory. I think that's the kind of Eastern, the one popular among Orthodox. There's basically this tradition in the Greek fathers how the phrase is used that Jesus fooled Satan. Okay, so like basically, how did Christ redeem the world? The world was ruled by Satan. Christ got in. He tricked Satan into, because the sacrificial mechanism, the human sacrifice, is your satanic mechanism par excellence. That's Girard, right?
Right. Right.
This human sacrifice thing, that's Satan casting out Satan. That's how Satan's prince of the world. He rules through these violent religions. So now Christ is going to come in and put an end to that. And he fools Satan because he makes himself a sacrifice. So Satan's rubbing his hands like, oh, I'm gonna mess him up. I'm gonna make an example of him. But by doing that, the inanity and the evil of this sacrificial system is debunked. Okay, so that's your ransom theory. You can look it up, but this actually jives with a lot of the Greek fathers. According to the Orthodox, this what's more now, Girard wouldn't be breaking his Catholic faith because none of these are like necessary for you to be a Catholic. Like you don't have to agree
Right.
with one or the other. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But Girard, I think, definitely turns towards his Greek one. In the West, like when I looked it up, there's Anselm of Canterbury. I think, like kind of like 1,000 years ago, one guy developed this theory where like it was about. It's this thing that's very popular in the West. It's about how humans offended God by breaking his rules, and that's Anselm, right? And because God's dignity is infinite, the scale of the offense that humans did against God is also infinite, and there's no way for humans to actually compensate, to make good on that offense. So there's this kind of legalistic thing where like you owe God, but because you're so deprived, you can't pay him back. So God himself is going to pay you back with the blood of his own son. Okay? This is no in Orthodox, I'm pretty sure this is like no, this you can't hold this,
That,
right?
right. That's
You see
that
what I'm
was
saying?
my intuition. You're right. 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 Because I guess the idea there would be that one aspect of the
I
Trinity
never
is
really got
essentially.
it, to be honest. Yeah.
You're right. My
Go ahead.
understanding is that in Anselm's like theory there, one aspect of the Trinity is essentially damning another aspect of the Trinity. Like,
Yeah.
maybe I'm misunderstanding, but
Yeah.
no, yeah, but that was just something I was curious about because Orthodox theology is something I've been trying to sort of understand more and more recently, and Girard is kind of where my roots are at. And I didn't know if there was any intersection, because something that I've been finding is that whereas a lot of this discussion we have in the West is Protestantism versus Roman Catholicism, it seems like it's one or the other here in the West. What I'm learning more and more is that you have like essentially these two sides of the same coin, and then you have the Eastern Orthodox over here who just have sort of like totally different answers to a lot of these different things, including the atonement. Um, yeah, I was curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a deep topic. I mean, I'm not qualified for it.
Fair
Maybe
enough.
these
Yeah.
things are not that different. When these people are first writing about it, I think Anselm didn't really expect these theory to be so, like, you know, taken at such face value. Augustine, too, right? These people are kind of writing. I don't think they were conscious that they're writing a doctrine or a dogma. You know, they're
Right.
theorizing. And
Okay. Yeah.
it can be interpreted in different ways. Augustine is interpreted in all kinds of different ways. The Protestants and Catholics debate over interpreting Augustine all the time. So, you know, a lot of these, it's a deep mystery, right? So I think you can approach it from many different ways. I think problem becomes when you simplify it and you try to make it too dogmatic, or
Which,
when you're just like actually not, you just pick some random guy. You know, yeah, you got to go with the tradition a little bit, right?
well, and
Go on.
I would say so far that has been something that I have very much appreciated. The more I learn about Orthodoxy, something I've appreciated is that they do approach these things sort of as mysteries. Like,
Yeah.
there's more to say the crucifixion of Jesus and the atonement than we could maybe even put into words necessarily. And
Right.
so that part of it I found refreshing. But anyways, didn't mean to get off in the weeds there. I know those are
No, no,
some
that's great.
difficult
Look,
topics, but
yeah, no, look. So Girard. So we said how Girard matches certain theory of atonement. Yes, that matches it. That's not all of it necessarily, right? It's so much more than that. It's beautiful. It's amazing, right? But Girard really was not a theologian. He was not a
right,
theologian. That when I first read Girard, I thought like, what does Catholic Church think about this? I mean, he's talking about evolution. You know, I thought like the church is gonna be not like him. Then I look it up, and it's like, oh, he's actually highly respected in Catholic Church. Oh, he's
mm-hmm.
respected in like all of like basically Christianity. You
Right,
know, so his thing is not like you got your theologies here, 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 and Girard is just something else. Like he's
right,
not competing with Augustine. He has a different subject matter,
right,
scientific subject matter, right? So everybody wants to reconcile science and religion, right? And a lot of times we talk about the Big Bang, and that's great too, the physical universe. And I was also like a physical universe type of guy, you know. Oh, Big Bang, how do you explain this? But then like I run into Girard, and he doesn't talk about the physical universe at all. He's talking about science, but he's talking about the science of anthropology.
mm-hmm.
So he provides this very satisfying reconciliation between anthropology and Christianity
Right,
that just kind of makes things click. And it's very useful because, you know, okay, if you're Christian, great. I mean, you got a lot of people, you go to university, study anthropology, they're not going to teach your art, okay? They're going to teach some very atheistic bullshit. I mean, I've seen it. Doesn't answer any questions. They teach you stuff like humans were like always trying to build technology, or humans were always trying to get high. Once I got converted to Girard, I can't take these like most of these things I can't take them seriously. I can take like some things seriously. I'm not kind of being dismissive, but you know, this idea that the earliest humans were just trying to like advance their technology, or they were just trying to live comfortably, or that, you know, priests were these like Thiel says, you know, Voltaire's idea was basically like, how did religion start? Bunch of guys like created a scam. They created a
right,
hustle. It's like, let's scare
right,
everybody. They're gonna go to hell. Take their money. You know.
right,
So these cartoonish things, they don't stand up to a serious anthropological inquiry. And what does stand up to it, amazingly enough, is actually the Christian theology. And that's why
Right.
church fathers are important. That's why Augustus is important. These guys lived in the Roman Empire. They were surrounded by pagans. Okay, they were seeing it day to day. We lost that. They are a record, and they're gonna be able to tell you like this is what's up. You go to a guy in the U.S. has no clue about history, no clue about geography. I mean, like the world is just like an American suburb. Yes, that person can get an appreciation of Christianity to some level, but they're not going to have that historical perspective. And you need the historical perspective to understand where you are and where it comes. If you care to know about that, I mean, you don't have to care to know about that. But you see people care about that. You know, everybody wants to know how pyramids were built, right? So you can't tell me, oh, it doesn't matter. And people are like, that doesn't matter. Joe Rogan's talking about it all the time. Well, Joe, let's get in some people who like who actually study that their whole life and are not American libertarians trying to tell you how it's all cool, man. Just get high, everything's great. No, it's that's not what happened. With the church fathers like Augustine or whoever your guy is, these early bishops, obviously Polycarp, whatever, right? These guys were looking at archaic and ancient religions with their own eyes in day to day, like in their city. You know what I mean? So they knew what they're talking about, and their audience listening to them would know what they're talking about, and that's lost on a lot of us. And once you get that little bit of an education about what that world looked like, I think you start seeing, appreciating those writings more, right? Like Augustine didn't talk about psychedelics, like none of these guys talked about it. Why? Because they were like moralistic about it. No, like these guys were like intellectuals, you know what I mean? They're like big minds. They're gonna tell you everything, you know what I mean? Like, and are they like just skipping over stuff? No. So anyway, that's it. I think we cover a lot of great points. I hope that was I hope especially for people who didn't read Girard, a lot of that stuff we did early on was about just trying to basically summarize that book about how the ritual works, how the kings came about, and how sacrificial mechanism came about. So I hope that came across pretty good.
I think so. And it's something that I think if you don't have any sort of exposure to it, like for example, Rogan, whenever Peter Thiel was bringing all this stuff up to him for the first time, I think if you don't have much exposure to it, it might come across as seeming sort of conspiratorial or even maybe tenuous. But
Right.
anyone who's watching this who might be skeptical or might think, I don't know about that. All I have to say is, mimetic theory is far cheaper than any other. Not I say cheaper. It's far more efficient and cost effective than any other form of psychoanalysis or any theory of history that you could ever deal with. And I can tell you this right now. I just wrote a piece this past week where I was talking about how genealogy is like an essential component of self-understanding. And for me, particularly, my
That's it.
understanding of Christianity, my understanding of my own faith, and where I was getting my presuppositions from and stuff like this, none of that stuff became clear or relevant or really like alive for me until I started to get the historical awareness that Girard's work affords, and the just people like Augustine or people like this, like studying history and seeing where your ideas are coming from, and really sort of digging into the history of your religion or just the history of religion in general. It really kind of opens your eyes to everything we take for granted in the modern day. Everything that we think is just humans all throughout time were these really like virtuous, civil, egalitarian loving people, and it's not necessarily that way. So yeah, anyone who's watching this, I highly encourage you to check out Girard. I highly encourage you to check out George's writing. And I'll link your blog below. I'll link your work below. And yeah, I mean that's all I have for today, George. Thank you very much for coming on. It was a great episode, and yeah, hope you have a good one.
Awesome, man. It was a pleasure. I think it went great, and let's stay in touch. Let's keep spreading the word.
Absolutely.